what you have within this new Rothschild framework, which is really essentially trying to establish a monopoly for the interests around the East India Company, the Dutch India Company. They are overthrowing governments and then appointing their own people. And if you kind of explore, the foundational aspects of this, you'll see that they're violating international law, they're violating national sovereignty. These are foreign interests that are controlling governments that do not answer to the people. They are a form of government corporate hybrid.
Hey friends, welcome back. That was prolific author and investigative journalist Susan Bradford, who I'll definitely be having back on the show. If you've got questions like I do about the cover-up of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, about the toppling of Venezuela, if you've got questions about Dan Bonigino and other seemingly patriots, and about precious metals moving to China, well, this is the broadcast for you. We cover all of it. As I ask the question, have we been conquered without a shot ever having been fired? Before we start, friends, just a quick word about a valued sponsor. You guys have probably seen the headlines about Ozempic. Major analysis found that people who stop taking these weight loss injections gain nearly all their weight back within a year, and that's if they don't have other health complications. This is why I like BioTrust's GLP-1 Elevate. It'll help your body naturally trigger the same hunger-controlling, craving-reducing signals that Ozempic claims to, but without needles, prescriptions, or scary side effects. It also promotes the feeling of fullness, helping reduce hunger hormones. It supports fat loss instead of muscle loss and helps maintain healthy blood sugar levels. For a limited time, you can grab BioTrust GLP-1 Elevate for 40% off only at trimwithsgt.com. Plus, you'll also receive a 60-day satisfaction guarantee and free express shipping on subscriptions. Once again, go to trimwithsgt.com to get this deal right now. The link is below. Hey friends, welcome back. Thanks so much for being here. Sean from SGT Report with an absolute blockbuster show today, guys. You're not going to want to miss this one with my friend, investigative journalist and author Susan Bradford. I'm on her website right here, susanbradfordbooks.com. Folks, we're going to talk a lot today about how the international bankers hijacked governments worldwide with BlackRock's help. BlackRock is the deep state and the banking elite, I can assure you. The books by Susan Bradford, well, I've already named one. Another, The BlackRock Bamboozle. How about the Saudi swindle and taking back America? I have some clips queued up right at the top of the show that I want to share, but let me introduce my guest, the one, the only Susan Bradford. Susan, how are you?
Doing very well, Sean. Good to be here. How are you doing today?
Good. I really appreciate you coming on to help me digest what the regime change in Venezuela and the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro is really about. Is it about China, oil, Bitcoin, silver, U.S. hegemony in this hemisphere, or all of the above? Or maybe Susan has a different take on it entirely. I'm just getting really worried about the end of the rule-based law and order in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, around the world. Well, let me take that back. In Western nations, because there seems to be some rule of law in the Eastern nations. I don't remember the last time China invaded a neighbor. What do you make of what I just said there? And then we'll get into it.
I thought it was very interesting that Stephen Miller had said that, for thousands of years, power has been based on the rule of might and not on the rule of law. And I think that his statement is incorrect, but it does show where they're coming from. And hopefully, as we get, further on into the discussion, I'd like to, show you and your audience how this group that is coalesced around our government began to kind of use the might as right paradigm.
Perfect. Where I want to start today is just with a couple of line items of current news for the audience. As you guys know, I watch Candace every single night, so we're going to play a clip regarding the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the lack of any real investigation. But let's address this elephant in the room, Dan Bonigino leaving the FBI after really not accomplishing very much and expecting to return to his show as a top podcaster in the conservative space. How's that going? Well, not so well. He's being ratioed in the comments and ratioed all over X. Here's Sneeko on the big problem, the elephant in the room regarding Bonigino.
Retweeting smears about me. Release the Epstein files, bro. Your whole platform was about how important it was and how Epstein didn't kill himself. Then you go and work for the FBI. Then you leave and you go back to podcasting and you forgot everything you said. What's your platform really about? What was all that redacted list about? You're going to attack me and tweet, oh my God, he's attacking a widow. You're protecting pedophiles, aren't you?
Okay, by the way, when it comes to attacking a widow, I'm sure that's in reference to Erica Kirk. Folks, Erica Kirk's past is now so clearly shady that I think it's absolutely evident that she is a deep state, if not spy, certainly an asset, if not the military-industrial complex, at the very least, perhaps an intelligence agency. But Bongino is being ratioed all over X. He and Dave Smith are going at it big time. Bongino is in block everybody mode because nobody has faith in the man that wore the Don't Get Dead t-shirt at AmFest. Folks, nobody's drinking Dan Bongino's Kool-Aid. And the reason I bring that up, Susan, is because you're a measured investigative journalist. You know what's up regarding the deep state. There's a chasm now in the MAGA movement. I'm taking heat in the comments for even bringing that up. I'm sorry, I am not the one who bent the knee to Bibi Netanyahu, Donald J. Trump. I'm not the one who covered up the Epstein files and the clients who took part in trafficking children. And I'm not the one covering up who really murdered Charlie Kirk. I'm not covering that up, but I'm reporting on the chasm in the space because people are fed up and it doesn't appear like we're going to get justice at any point. So what do you make of Dan Bongino returning to his microphone, expecting things just to return to the way they were a year ago before he joined the FBI?
Yeah, that's a good question. Dan Bongino was one of the most highly rated hosts for on Rumble, and I believe that one of their counsel, I believe, for Rumble joined the CIA as deputy director. So there was a very tight relationship between these platforms and the intelligence agencies, and they are working hand in hand with the Trump administration. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that Rumble was one of the first platforms, if not one of the only platforms, to host Trump news conferences and Trump to platform him, live and to promote his content. So I think that Dan Bongino is kind of working as part of the PR aspects of the Trump administration, and I think that he has not lived up to what we all expected of him, is to really hold the deep state accountable. I think unfortunately, he has become part of the deep state and is in a way beholden to them.
Well, that is the sense that people have because we're not stupid. And it just seems like the FBI treats us as though we're stupid. Just swallow the official story like we made you do in 1963, a lone gunman. It's always a lone gunman. Well, here's the problem for Brian Harpole, the head of Charlie Kirk's security, when he was on the Sean Ryan broadcast. Here's my advice. Never do a public broadcast. Never do a public podcast when you're lying and covering up the truth. Listen to this. This is from the latest Candace Owens episode.
Information came in on the 24th, and then the information share starts where we're walking through, everything that you need for a detail.
Everything that you need for a detail. Obviously, elsewhere in the interview, he describes this conversation that he had with the chief of police. He's upset about the chief of police not covering the rooftops because he feels that his team was on it. So on it. You're coordinating with whole police departments. You're discussing drones. Drones were not allowed. And so they just had to let that go. Well, interestingly enough, I received a tip from someone that was directly involved with the planning of an event that Charlie Kirk was supposed to attend the following day, on September 11th, the day after his assassination. Charlie was slated to speak in Woodland Park, Colorado, at the Charis Bible College. Okay, so that's in Woodland Park, Colorado. He was slated to speak there. And according to this person, after Charlie got assassinated, there was a bit of a panicked meeting that took place, which was headed by the chief of police. They decided to transform this event into a vigil, and they were panicked because, believe it or not, they had absolutely no security plan in place. They thought, how odd. We don't have a security plan in place. Now we better consider this. And we need to make sure that we have police officer involvement. Why didn't Dan Flood and Brian Harpole and Turning Point USA's security have any coordination with the police department up in Colorado? if this is what they normally do, and whatever the way he over describes that, and they get the plan, and everybody can access and start to begin to speak, and then we speak to the police. I mean, we do all this stuff. We just didn't think to do that for the event that he had the next day.
I'll pause it there. I want to remind folks that on Sean Ryan, Brian Harpole said they began the preparations for UTU on August 24th. Then he said it actually began long before that, which is protocol for all of these speaking events, except for the next one scheduled for September 11th. No security detail, no security plan, no communication with the college in Colorado, because they never expected Charlie to get there. That's the takeaway. By the way, I've got one last thing to share before we jump into Venezuela. Susan, the official story regarding the assassination of Charlie Kirk stinks to high heaven. Candace Owens is being dragged through the mud because she's daring to ask not only the right questions, she's uncovering details and evidence of multi-nation state involvement in this. At the very least, it was a military op, but it appears to be a military op to murder Charlie Kirk involving multiple nation states. And we're to believe Dan Bonigino in the official story, Tyler Robinson acted alone. This whole thing, I keep calling this the biggest story of 2025 and now in 2026. Who actually ordered the murder and carried out the assassination of Charlie Kirk, Susan?
Yeah, that is a question I cannot answer, but I think Dan Bongino is definitely going to toe the official Trump narrative. I think he has to at this point, but I don't think we can look to him to get to the bottom of it. I'm certainly glad that Candace is courageous enough to ask those tough questions. She's certainly taken a lot of heat for it.
Well, she has indeed. Stitch it together for me as part of our larger conversation as we talk about the East India Company, the history of all of this stuff going on in the world, BlackRock, how it's captured the world, destabilized sovereign nations, as we're seeing happen in Venezuela, because Candace Owens notes that the Likud party in Israel just named her and Tucker Carlson as enemies that must be fought. She says these people are murderers. Murderers are threatening me and Tucker Carlson over speech. How is this all acceptable to our government? To which I wrote, because the Likud party has captured our government. Do you think I have that wrong? Can you help me see our cup is half full? Because, I saw Mark Levin wrap his arm so tightly around Donald J. Trump in the White House that it kind of appeared that Mark Levin was the boss. And Mark Levin worships at the altar of the Likud party and Bibi Netanyahu. Help me see this a different way. Am I missing something?
Well, I think that you're looking at kind of an Anglo-Zionist takeover of the United States. And of course, at the very pinnacle is Rothschild, and the Rothschilds created Israel. So I think that they are kind of working through our government to advance their own political agendas. I do wonder about the extent to which Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens are independent because, and they could very well be, I don't know, but Candace Owens is married to a farmer, last name Farmer, whose father is a gold bullion dealer or metals dealer for Rothschild. And I know that Tucker Carlson has for years been a neoconservative, and he is aligned with a number of the kind of the evangelical groups, which are also aligned with the Zionists. So I'm wondering about the extent to which they are truly independent. I think some of the backers of Carlson may be Cambridge Analytica, the Mercers. And I think one of the gentlemen's name is Alik Olmed Malik, I might be mispronouncing the name, but he was a former banker with Bank of America in London. So I think that there are some kind of maybe forces at work. There could be maybe behind the scenes a bit of rivalry between the different factions. But I think at the same time, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson might be part of the theater that they're using to kind of, appeal to part of the MAGA movement that is sort of breaking away and seeing things, but then kind of keeping them corralled within like the same kind of, territory.
That is entirely possible, and it's something my wife and I have talked about. Now, the only thing I would say regarding that, and again, I'm one of these type of people that put a lot of eggs in a basket when I really believe in the basket. And case in point, Donald J. Trump. Feeling a little let down by Donald J. Trump in so many ways. And I got a lot of eggs in the Candace basket because when I watch her on a nightly basis with my wife for the last 3 months, or since a week after Charlie was murdered, she returned to her show. She conveys so much authenticity,
Yes, she
emotion,
does.
and power through truth. Light of truth seems to be shining through her, that she resonates with me on a completely different frequency compared to a Kash Patel, a Dan Bonigino, or anybody else who has bent the knee, like, for instance, Steven Crowder, Insurrection Barbie, Ashton Forbes. Who else has bent the knee? Tim Pool has clearly bent the knee. So I sometimes wonder, and what I'm choosing to believe is, like Kanye, Candace finally recognized, like Charlie Kirk realized TPUSA had been taken over, was being infiltrated by a Zionist entity. So he sent an email saying, we're going to do a Doge investigation to find out where the money's coming in and where the money's going. Like a few days later, he was dead. I'd like to believe these people are trying to break free of the slave chains. Candace Owens has really said that explicitly. And they are speaking truth because of the way that they are being targeted in the town square by the people that have bent the knee and the people that write those checks. Do you think there's any chance of that, or am I just hopelessly naive?
I agree with you that I also sense that authenticity from Candace, and I know that she was a very, very good longtime friend of Charlie's, and I think that she is defending him passionately as a friend. So I think that is altogether possible. And I did have the good fortune of meeting Charlie Kirk at a CPAC event many years ago, and he struck me as a person of integrity, had a great leadership ability, far beyond his years. So I think that maybe they were honest players within a dishonest system. And, she could very well be standing up for what she believes is right. And I do believe, sometimes we have to follow our own intuition and discernment. And I do sense that authenticity from Candace.
Yeah, and just to back up what you've been saying, though, I absolutely leave the door open to the fact that these people may be groomed from birth. Now, Candace is a different story. She's cut from a different cloth, and that may be the glimmer of hope for humanity that she represents. Because even Charlie Kirk, and I know this firsthand because on a vacation one time, my wife and I happened to run into a guy at a lovely hotel bar that we got to know, he and his wife, and he said that he knew Charlie. This is years ago, guys. He knew Charlie Kirk from high school, and Charlie was always in a prep school for advanced kids, really brilliant kids. So I think he was fostered, right? He was fast tracked. But here's the thing. We know the deep state tentacles reach down to Main Street. When I say that, I mean, Candace's investigation, Susan, is revealing that the military industrial complex in this web of connected families reaches all the way down into mega churches, all the way down to Main Street. And it's certainly
Right.
possible that exceptional human beings like Charlie Kirk are groomed and then used, to the ends of the enemy. And it's entirely possible that Charlie Kirk, boy, I'm babbling here, but what I'm
I
trying to
understand what you're
say,
saying.
what I'm trying to say is I agree with you, but what if Charlie was a pure heart? What if Candace is a pure heart and they both are part of one of the biggest stories of deep state intrusion since the murder of JFK?
That is possible, and I think that a lot of people, know that if you want to advance within the system, you have to align with it and kind of toe the line. And I think that as we've seen, that the deep state has become so corrupt and so pernicious that I think a lot of people are saying, I cannot go along with this because my the future of the country and the future of our children, our children's children is at stake. So maybe they are taking a principled stand, against it.
Yeah, well, that's
And
what
I
I'd
think they have a
like.
pure heart.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to believe. I don't have any choice at this point because what Candace is uncovering is making me think that the smart money is looking for an exit plan. Because look, it's starting to feel like our nation, our government, the military industrial complex, it's all been conquered without ever firing a shot. I'm not sure how we take it back when it's this corrupt. Case in point, and then we're going to get to Venezuela. You guys remember when that Miami condominium collapsed? I think it was in North Miami, right on the ocean. It collapsed in the middle of the night, killing everybody inside that building, people asleep in their beds.
Just into our newsroom, this security camera video. Now, remember, this is from an adjacent condominium. Stunning. It captured the moment of the collapse, a 12-story complex simply turning to rubble. It almost looks as if it was an intended implosion.
Well, I'd never heard this about that building collapse, and it just makes me wonder how infiltrated is every aspect of our government by this Zionist entity. And frankly, the IDF, which now does policing of speech over at TikTok.
We all remember the apartment complex that just mysteriously building 7'd into rubble in North Miami. That was in Bal Harbor. That happened on the same night that John McAfee died. Wow. And it's believed that he had an apartment or information stored in this one little apartment in Bal Harbor. When that apartment building collapsed, they didn't let American response teams or like emergency teams do all the digging. Jake, I'm not even kidding. Go look this up. They literally brought in the IDF to dig through the rubble. It's Ron DeSantis had a whole ceremony where he was like patting the IDF on the back. He's like, thanks.
How can they rationalize this? How can they bring the IDF to handle American matters? This is insane.
Dude.
It's kind of I was all excited about DeSantis at one point.
Okay, let me pause it there. Look, I'm not trying to go on a Zionist rant for this entire conversation, but I think it's the elephant in the room. I've always thought it's the elephant in the room. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the money makers, they print the stuff out of thin air. They buy up our government. They buy up all the corporations of consequence. Then they have BlackRock really as their sort of public-facing investment vehicle. And maybe, Susan, that gets us off on the track of what's really going on in Venezuela.
And you also have a Trump administration, and including the Trump family, trying to get into stable coins, which will essentially make them the shadow banker of the United States and potentially the world if they can offer their stable coin as a global currency backed by the U.S. dollar or pegged to the U.S. dollar and then backed by U.S. securities. And they're going to get a cut of each of those transactions potentially.
Okay, you're so sharp. You are so sharp. I love that you just brought that up because guess what? As somebody who holds Bitcoin and who also has invested in physical gold and silver over the years, I've had a thesis regarding Bitcoin that it is going to be part of the system to save the dollar, okay, by buying U.S. treasuries through Tether. Tether uses the interest income to buy more Bitcoin, but now Tether's bought a lot of gold. But guess what? If China's not on board with that narrative, if the East moves away from that Bitcoin narrative, I don't think it's going to work.
And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, I think China has outlawed stablecoin. So they're not using it. And I think they're trying to move towards a hard currency, which is why they're accumulating the gold and silver. So and if you can imagine, if you have a stable coin backed by the dollar, well, the dollar is backed by nothing. We're still tied to the that old system. But I'm wondering what Trump is doing with gold, if oil, if he might be trying to have our dollar backed by oil, like some new type of petrodollar. I'm not sure.
Right.
That's interesting.
Or Bitcoin. I just don't think it's going to work if China is actively now hoarding all of the physical silver and all of the commodities. They want copper, they want zinc, they want nickel, they want the silver, they want the gold in physical form. They're no longer going to export any silver. And you are such a student of history regarding the Dutch East India Company, etc., going all the way back, House of Rothschild, all of this stuff, before Rothschild, going back to the Vatican. It seems to me that what we saw happen during the Opium Wars in China, as Britain tried to extract all of the physical silver out of China, it sort of feels like now we're seeing the reverse of that. We're seeing sort of a Sun Tzu art of war style strategy as China now hoards all of the physical silver from the West. I mean, they play the long game, don't they?
They do play the long game, and I think what's important to understand is that we're not looking at like countries, trying to employ different strategies. You're looking at a parasitic network that works through countries to extract the wealth. They then consolidate their position, then move on from country to country, essentially kind of looting those countries, and then consolidating their own power on top of them. So I think they're now moving their base of operations over to China, which is why we're seeing what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I want to share this with the audience. You wrote to me during the Venezuela coup, the U.S. intervened in the affairs of a sovereign nation. We all know that. Now, I'm being told in the comments, Sean, don't go there. Okay, don't go there. Don't go there. You're causing a chasm in MAGA. And I said, no, it's not me that's causing the chasm in MAGA. It's the cover-up of the Epstein client list. It's the cover-up of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And it's the bending of the knee to Bibi Netanyahu. But now suddenly we're going to operate another country. The United States is going to operate another country until a proper government can be installed? Yep, here's an article from The Independent. What happens next in Venezuela? Trump says the U.S. will run it. Not a problem. We can barely run our cities and states, but I'm sure this will go very well, Susan. So what's this really about?
I think it's about many things. I think Maduro was a puppet of the syndicate, and so he was easily replaceable. During the previous Trump administration, he tried to set up a stable coin that was symbolically backed by oil, gold, and silver. And during this time, they absconded with the gold to parts of the world that coincidentally happened to be places of great Trump influence, like with Kushner and some of these other individuals, like Turkey, and there was one African country, I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head, but this is a country where Stephen Miller is actually sending back immigrants from the United States. So these are areas where the syndicate has political influence. Eventually, that coin collapsed, and that individual who was leading the coin effort has partnered up with Peter Thiel, but the main hurdle that they encountered with instituting the stable coin was a regulatory one, where there were sanctions against Venezuela by the United States, but they can overcome that by having the United States run Venezuela. Then essentially you no longer have that regulatory issue. So I'm wondering if that isn't maybe part of the agenda of what they're trying to achieve. That they want to kind of impose the stable coin and maybe eventually have oil transactions done through the stable coin, and maybe eventually bring in a smart city or a type of an AI, a type of economy.
Guys, just a quick word about something pretty darn important. If you're over 40 and planning to retire someday, the window to protect what you've built may be smaller than you realize. Here's a question most people never ask. Is your portfolio built for what's coming next? The debasement of our currency? Many investors in their 40s and 50s discover they have little to no exposure to precious metals. That means their savings are largely tied to markets, policies, and paper assets, with very little real protection if conditions change. As retirement moves from someday to on the horizon for you, protecting what you've already built becomes just as important as growing it. That's where Noble Gold Investments comes in, helping investors reduce risk by adding physical gold and or silver to their portfolios. Right now is a smart time to talk with Noble Gold Investments. This isn't investment advice. Do your own due diligence. But we can promise you this: no pressure, no sales gimmicks, just clear answers and a strategy built around your goals. And for a limited time, you can receive this 3-ounce American Virtues Independence Silver Round as a bonus available for new qualified accounts. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com and build your portfolio for the long term. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. The link is below.
Eventually bring in a smart city or a type of an AI, a type of economy. Stephen Miller's point that we live in a world that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, and that is governed by power. And that's the East India Company, ethos. So maybe I can jump from that back, and then go into the history of how we got here, if that works.
Yeah, that works perfectly. In fact, I want you to keep on going because that's exactly where I wanted to go. And I didn't quite know how to get there because I don't know the history as well as you do. And that's why you're here. Now, for Stephen Miller to say, we live in a world that's ruled by force. Well, there you go, folks. I thought we lived in a world, at least in a country, ruled by the rule of law and the constitutional principles under which our beautiful nation was founded. Now, to me, that ship appears to have sailed a long time ago, as we're asked to once again just, swallow the lone gunman story. I don't know. It's, again, as I said earlier in the broadcast, I'm going to keep saying it. It's starting to feel like we've been conquered without a shot ever having been fired, Susan.
That is correct, Sean. It's taken me really a long time to actually figure out what was going on, like how we arrived at this place. But it all comes down to the East India Company. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Europe, the governments in Europe were originally based upon Jesus Christ. Like that was the authority upon which the sovereign drew its authority, divine right to rule. And the sovereigns within these countries held the power of the purse and the power of policy. So during the Reformation, the Vatican tried to consolidate power over Europe. This led in Spain and Portugal for the monarch to they told the Sephardic Jews either convert or leave the country. Well, they chose to leave, and many of them did, and they made a beeline to Holland. And within Holland was undergoing the Reformation at that point, and they teamed up with a group of merchants who established the Dutch India Company called the VOC. And this was the first model of a government corporate hybrid. And what that meant is that they were putting the assets of the state and the power and the money of the state behind a corporation that then traveled around the world to conquer territories, institute its own authority. It had its own army. It was able to levy taxes. So the VOC became a very powerful entity that eventually moved over to England. It became absorbed within the East India Company. And the crown was... they were undergoing, a bit of rivalry between the Protestants and the Catholics. You have a Dutch invader. The Dutch invaded England. They took over Parliament, and then they installed a Dutch king, William, during William and Mary, where they said, you can be king, you can have a constitutional monarchy as long as you cede the power of the purse to Parliament. And this began the process of conquering England. England, from that point onward, was no longer in control of its government. The King William then chartered a central bank, the Bank of England, the first central bank, which was peopled and whose main shareholders were the Sephardic Jews. So from that point onward, England was then put into debt, and you have a government that was using the assets of the nation, the assets of the people, to establish monopolies and to develop their commerce all over the world. And this became the model. So once they had consolidated their power around the British Crown, around the City of London, they then began to overtake the Freemasons. The Freemasons were originally, they were Christian in origin. They were professional guilds which maintained the standards throughout the professions in service of the Christian monarch to build God's kingdom on earth. Once George of Hanover became the King of England, the Freemasons were organized. They brought in these bankers and these merchants, and then began to work through the Freemasonic networks around Europe to overthrow the Christian monarchs, install republics or create new republics in which they were the law of the land. So you have now governments cropping up all over Europe. They appear on the surface to be republics, but you've got like a new commercial force taking over these governments. Establishing central banks, and then placing those countries into debt to them. And of course, one of the leading bankers behind this movement was Rothschild, who was Meyer Amschel Rothschild, who was an apprentice to the Oppenheimers, who were one of the most prominent court Jews in Europe. They managed the money for the Holy Roman Empire, and so what they were finding is if they can kind of foment revolution, if they can overthrow governments, they could then install their puppet regimes. So this kind of movement gained a lot of momentum during the Napoleonic Wars. So at one point, Napoleon, he was bankrolled by Rothschild with Oppenheimer's munitions, providing the troops and providing the military wherewithal. They were able to invade Italy, seize the Venetian fondi, the family wealth, which was among one of the greatest pools of assets in the world. The Rothschild absconded with the wealth of the Holy Roman Empire, and they began to kind of build this wealth. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Vatican fell. It became it was invaded and conquered. Italy was united, and a kind of a puppet king was installed. And this puppet king, his grandson, then appointed Mussolini, who became as prime minister. Mussolini then made himself a dictator, and then establish the Vatican as a sovereign. But all of these networks are, were funded by Rothschild. They were kind of propelled and pushed, supported by the Freemasons. You have, in the case of Switzerland, that a revolution kind of broke out. The Swiss cantons were then united under a Swiss federal republic, which then charted the Bank of International Settlements, the central bank of the central banks, which then, of course, provided for itself complete sovereignty. You cannot audit the Bank of International Settlements. You can't arrest its personnel. They're completely above the law. But the fact is that sovereignty does not work like that. Sovereignty is, well, it's from a God, but it's from the people. The people create the governments. The governments then respond to the people. What you have within this new Rothschild framework, which is really essentially trying to establish a monopoly for the interests around the East India Company, the Dutch India Company. They are overthrowing governments and then appointing their own people. And if you kind of explore, where the foundational aspects of this, you'll see that they're violating international law, they're violating national sovereignty. These are foreign interests that are controlling governments that do not answer to the people. They are a form of government corporate hybrid.
1,000%. Scheinbaum in Mexico, Mark Carney in Canada, Erich Starmer in Germany. And of course, the Macrons. Emmanuel Macron, famously for a brief time, a Rothschild banker. Well, let me just ask you this sort of a dumb guy question. I think it's fascinating that the charter of the Bank of International Settlements suggests these people are above the law. They can't be arrested. They can't be audited. They can do whatever the hell they want, including traffic in children and sacrifice kids. Literally, folks, is it even possible for anything to stand in opposition to this at this point? And is China doing that? Is the East doing that? Is this move by China in the hoarding of metals? My fingers are crossed when I ask this question. Are they standing up to this entity by doing so? Or do you think it's part of the plan just to bring down the United States? Because I'm here to tell you folks, that could happen. If the dollar is abandoned and all the precious metals move east, we're a hurting unit, because I'm not sure how much longer the dollar survives.
Yeah, that's I do think that we can challenge the illegitimacy of this process or what the system, because they're creating the power in a vacuum and then appointing themselves as the power of the state, the law of the land, and you can't legally do that. In terms of China, we know that the East India Company went into China and then weakened the people with, the Chinese people with opium. The East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, were the original human traffickers, arms traffickers, drug traffickers. But China was conquered. And after World War II, a plan was hatched at Yalta whereby, the Rothschilds and their affiliated interests had decided that they would elevate communist China to preside over the New World Order, and then they would reduce the United States to a bankrupt welfare state. So I think that this is an agenda that they're pursuing. I'd like to think that China is separate. I have seen indications whereby BlackRock tried its usual shenanigans in China, was pushed back, did not succeed very well. I think the Chinese were onto them. But the Chinese ruler was tapped by the bankers. So he is a product of the bankers. I believe he does answer to them. But there are also, different factions fighting amongst each other. And China, interestingly enough, was the inventor of the fiat currency. Throughout their history, they understood that the emperor would hold all the wealth, like the real metals, silver, gold, and so on, and they would provide a fiat currency that was sanctioned by the state and was used to facilitate commerce. So only they could hold those metals. Everybody else would have to hold the fiat, and then through the course of that system, eventually the emperor would wind up with all the wealth, and everybody else would hold depreciating assets. So that was a strategy that they used. Europe for centuries was aware of this type of strategy. strategy. They rejected it. They knew that a fiat currency would destabilize economies. They knew that it would eventually wind up, rendering the country, the cost of living unaffordable for most people. But the Rothschilds adapted this strategy and imported it into the nations around the world, particularly the U.S., for that very purpose, that they were going to absorb the wealth and then reduce everybody else to poverty or to like a slave type status. So I think that this is part of a long-term strategy.
Yeah, and it feels like we're there. I mean, does it not?
There.
It does not.
Does,
I mean, seriously, young people are freaking out on X. I mean, literally crying in their cars outside of Walmarts about they can't afford to pay their rent and all they do is work 2 jobs a day. And then I remind them about silver. You know, I think a 50-cent piece in 1963 was worth 50 cents. Today, that same 50-cent piece will cost you $27. I mean, they've destroyed us, and now the metal is moving to the east. I don't know. Does this not seem like a satanic plan in its brilliance? Because I don't know what kind of human mind could concoct this and pull it off decade after decade after decade after decade. I mean, the tentacles reach so far that now, really truly based on Candace's research and investigation, I'm starting to feel like the military had a role in Charlie's assassination, working with other nation states. And when I say military, I'm talking about military familial ties within leadership at TPUSA. I mean, there's so many more questions than answers. Again, it makes me sort of feel like the tentacles of the military industrial complex, $1 trillion a year to the Pentagon. We're also naive. We thought, what? That was just to like keep the aircraft carriers afloat? No, these tentacles reach all the way down to Main Street. And that's what has me really, really concerned, because even if Candace is right and we prove all of this, I think it may just as well be the coming out party for the deep state, because what y'all going to do about it, right? I mean, that might be the great revelation is, yeah, what y'all going to do about it? We whacked Charlie Kirk. What y'all going to do about it?
I think it's an act of desperation on their part. If you can imagine that the East India Company kind of transplanted itself within our government, the military is essentially their weapons shop around the world. So the taxpayers support it. They create they fund the weapons, and then those weapons are sold overseas. So it's part of their commercial plan, and it's part of the
ties
plan where they then use those weapons to conquer nations and to extract as a coercive force to extract their natural resources. But since we actually lost our country during the Civil War. This was a war, many people don't know this. It was fought not really to end slavery, though that was a part of it. It was to protect the Rothschilds' cotton plantations in Egypt. And so they knew that if we had cheap labor, free labor through slavery, which they brought to this country, they would not be able to compete. So their Freemasonic groups kind of conceived the Civil War. It was an illegal mercenary war on U.S. soil. And then during that improper war, they then slipped in their own government service contractors into our seat of government. And the way that the reason that these contractors were on our soil is that during the American Revolution, we signed a number of treaties with England. But one of them was the Treaty of Paris, which forbade them from ever governing on American soil. So what they're doing now is entirely in violation of that treaty, and it's illegal. But we did provide a delegated powers to their navy to protect our commerce. And what appears to have happened is that when our government went into recess and it became dormant, that this navy entity, which was a government service contractor, which was chartered by the British monarch and is controlled by Parliament, which is in turn controlled by these foreign bankers, then kind of slipped into power. And you'll see that from this point onward, you have the creation of the railroads, which follow the model of the VOC EIC government corporate hybrid. And you now have a government that is working towards consolidating its own power, consolidating wealth, and using the public to extract wealth. To give you another example, the Federal Reserve, which is unconstitutional, was established during a quorum. was during was when there was no quorum within the United States. It was during a government recess in 1913.
Yeah, right before
So
Christmas break.
during Christmas break. So that never should have happened. There was no contest. There was no debate. And yet the newspapers reported that it received unanimous support in Congress, like a majority of the vote. There was one congressman, one representative, one senator, and the president.
It's unbelievable.
Mhm.
It's unbelievable. Let me ask you something as we sort of try to wrap this up. And it's such a
Okay.
far-reaching conversation. We should talk for 2 hours. But you mentioned the Treaty of Paris. Can you just back up to that? And I guess what I'm driving at is not being a student of history as much as you are.
Mhm.
There's some weird stuff going on in Delaware and with the French government and French planes flying in and quasi governmental corporations, NGOs, some really weird, shady stuff going on in Delaware. And I just want you to talk about the French because, I have a tendency to say all roads lead to Israel. The Mossad is under every bush. You know what? That's actually not what Candace is revealing. In large part, she's revealing the role of French legionnaires, the French government having a lot of power through the state of Delaware. And she sort of concluded that, yeah, we never won the Revolutionary War, and we've always sort of been under the control of the French. That's sort of new to me as an idea, but the stuff she's finding in Delaware is really, really eye-opening.
I think we did win the American Revolution, but we lost it during the Civil War. So we lost our country during the Civil War. The French are controlled by the Rothschilds. Now our American revolutionaries were partners with the French revolutionaries, but there was a legitimate and a very well-meaning and idealistic faction of that. Those people were assassinated, and then this more nefarious revolutionary aspect took over. And I should also point out that with all these, the millions of people, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people who've lost their lives during the world wars, during the communist revolutions, these were all wars that were concocted by this network to steal the natural resources of these countries, steal the wealth, and then to install their own puppet regimes for the purposes of establishing a monopoly. So it is a very, it's a long-reaching plan, but it's come at a huge cost for all of humanity.
Yeah, it sure has. And let me read what you wrote here regarding how to wrap this up in terms of the American people being essentially conquered by this apparatus. You wrote, the federal government is operating on behalf of the City of London beyond its delegated powers in violation of the Constitution. Now, here's sort of what I was sort of driving at with that last question. The Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolution, specifically forbids the British from governing the United States.
Which they're doing now.
Again, the French. It doesn't forbid the French from playing a role in governing the United States. Again, Delaware. Why are all of these corporations, these quasi-governmental, sort of secretive, weird corporations with military ties in Delaware? Okay. And then you wrote, the American people are protected by the U.S. Constitution and treaty rights, but these must be honored and enforced, which I don't feel like they are right now. And then maybe they never will be again. Did you agree with me? They're not being enforced right now, correct?
They're not being enforced. So what you have is a government corporate hybrid, which is creating many different factions or many different entities, franchises. So the churches now have been turned into government contractors under the Bush administration. You have the environmental organizations and these different NGOs. They all work on behalf of this entity, this corporate entity, and they're subsidized by the taxpayer. And I should also point out that the fiat currency was meant to launch during the administration of JFK. That's when they established the USAID. It came in instead during the Nixon administration. And then the person leading the charge was Peter Peterson. You may recognize the name. He founded Blackstone, which then created BlackRock. And these are the entities now that are using that fiat dollar, that are securitizing our debt backed by the taxpayers to then establish a monopoly on wealth and a monopoly on commerce in our country.
Well, that's kind of horrifying because I'm not sure how we unwind any of this. I used to be so hopeful. I was naive enough to believe, Susan, that Donald J. Trump was not beholden to these people, despite, loans from powerful Jews, etc. I just really thought This was our last chance, our last stand, and we were going to take our nation back. Now I'm very, very dubious of that. And you wrote, sovereignty in the U.S. resides with the people who created sovereign states, to whom the federal government must answer and serve within reserved delegated powers. Okay, they're off the reservation. We still have states' rights, but so many of these states, case in point, the one I live in, have been ruled by people at least as bad as the ones we've just discussed. I think these people, Tim Walz, for instance, in the pocket of this apparatus to some degree. You wrote, the government as established by the founders established a government of, by, and for the people, only to be usurped by the City of London, serving itself at the expense of the American people. So with all that said, if I feel like the military industrial complex is pretty much wholly owned by the same apparatus, well, first, let's start there. Am I wrong? Am I just taking too much data away from Candace's investigation? You know, as I watch our government ignore who really assassinated Charlie Kirk, as that's all being covered up by Kash Patel, as Tulsi Gabbard is not allowed to examine the possibility of foreign ties to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Am I wrong to believe that it's just too big, monolithic, and too all-reaching to ever defeat this apparatus that's strangling us?
I think the way that you defeat it is that you have the illegitimacy and the truth of what has transpired reach a critical mass, and then you can then lobby for change. And I look to the inspiration of Bill Browder, he was an investor in Russia. One of his accountants was assassinated, and he lobbied for the Magnitsky Act, and the Magnitsky Act held the criminal Russian oligarchs accountable, for their money laundering and for their crimes. He was able to have this instituted internationally. So I think that the elite know that their position is legally precarious. They know they don't have legal standing, but that's why that they put so much effort into propaganda, into force, into trying to impose their will upon us. So I think it's really up to us to stop allowing ourselves to be distracted, and then to maybe to kind of organize. It might even manifest in a lobbying group, but to ensure that our public understands what has transpired at a critical level. And I think from that position, we can then become empowered to take the country back.
Boy, I sure hope so. It just feels a little bit overwhelming when you start to realize that even Dan Bonigino, then all these clips surfaced, after he became deputy director of the FBI. All these clips surfaced of him years ago being asked, what is he most passionate about? What do you care about the most? He said, Israel, defending the state of Israel. So I just look, I think that we have been hopelessly infiltrated. And you mentioned the mega churches. They've been infiltrated by this entity, as has TPUSA. Guys, there are some bad folks in leadership positions at TPUSA. And I guess as we say our goodbyes, Susan, could you leave us with a glimmer of hope regarding this investigation Candace is doing? Because I'm starting to think that you might be right. And I'm not throwing Candace under the bus. I respect her intellect. I think her heart is in the right place. I think she spits truth. But what if she's being allowed to spit that truth? Because, as you noted, she married George Farmer in sort of a shotgun marriage, an 18-day romance where she admits it wasn't even that romantic. It feels like an arranged marriage to some degree, just like it's starting to look like Charlie's marriage with Erica Kirk was an arranged marriage, or Erica was the honeypot and Charlie was honeypotted. I mean, infiltrate, okay, sometimes I think she was an operative. I feel like she for sure was an operative. Maybe this investigation that Candace is doing, and I hope that's not the case, it's just all part of their coming out party, in the sense that, again, like I said, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it, folks?
I think there are also a number of elites who do not go along with this agenda, who are opposed to it. I'd like to think that they are working with people like Candace to help bring forth the truth. I think it could also be that they know that the public has reached a certain level of awareness, and then she's bringing out this truth to boost her own credibility. But I think it's up to us then to see what she has to say. I think her words are very valuable. Her revelations are very valuable. But then to keep searching. Don't allow her to define, where this investigation ultimately goes.
No, I think you're spot on with that. And the last thing I would say regarding her investigation is those who are listening, people like Mel, people like Project Constitution, Ryan Matta, there's so many people doing pretty good work, sussing out, and a whole bunch of people we don't know. Anons, who are doing incredible work, and it is revealing some horrible, horrible truths. I would really advise people to watch Candace on their own, pretty much on a daily basis, because if you're not and you're judging her, then you're letting others do your thinking for you. Here's SusanBradfordBooks.com. I will leave it linked below. And also, if you want to tip Susan, buy her a coffee, would you? I mean, $5 a month. Buy the woman a coffee. How else can we support you, Susan?
I think you're also welcome to join my Substack. I post every week or so for different deep dives, if you will. I'd love to have you join me there as well if you'd like.
All right. I appreciate you very much.
Appreciate you.
Final word, just to put you on the spot. I mean, why wouldn't I? Come on. Got Susan Bradford here. Let's put her on the spot. If you had to bet about what really happened regarding the assassination of Charlie Kirk on September 10th, what would you put your money on? Would you put it on a lone gunman named Tyler Robinson? Would you put it on something entirely different? And I'll let you fill in the blanks on what that entirely different is. I've got my view.
Okay, this is only like women's intuition, and it's not based on any research on my part. But I think that he may have been part of this retirement, if you will. And I think that he was receiving a lot of pushback over the Israeli question. He knew that he could not continue to go down that road. And I think he was also getting a little too old to be debating college students. He was moving into his 30s. And maybe the age discrepancy was becoming a little more apparent. I personally think or suspect that he might have been part of this public retirement so that he could then put an end to the Israeli question and then, maybe retire in peace. If I'm not mistaken, I think that he saw how the original assassination attempt against Trump made him into a martyr and brought more force behind the Trump movement, more, and I think maybe he was trying to coalesce the public around himself while also keeping Turning Point alive, while also maybe putting an end to the Israeli question and then retiring with honor, because I don't think he had any way forward.
Okay,
that's my take.
That's very interesting. Let me read between the lines. Maybe the audience is smarter than I. Are you suggesting, as others have, that maybe Charlie Kirk actually didn't die and this whole thing was an orchestration? I just want to be clear.
I think that's a possibility. Charlie was very close to the Trump family, including Don Trump Jr., who who's received Pentagon contracts, and who was involved with the stable coin and with the creation of this new economy. He was extremely powerful. He was potentially a future presidential candidate. I would like to think that they wouldn't have to go to the extremes of removing him to eliminate him as a problem, that he could have retired and assumed a new identity, which the deep state is known to do. So I would like to think that that's what happened to him, but I don't know, and I guess the truth is out, or the question is out, is still open.
I respect your thinking on that to the degree that, although it's a deeply cynical view, I completely understand it. Others share your viewpoint that that's a possibility, and it certainly is a possibility because we don't have any answers. We don't understand why all the video was seized at the hospital they took Charlie to. We don't understand why there's no autopsy report. Supposedly he's been buried in a private Catholic ceremony, but nobody seems to know where. So there are, again, more questions than answers. But what I sort of choose to believe is this deep state, well, they saw more value in TPUSA with Charlie being a martyr and Charlie out of the way than with Charlie still there. But either way, there's been a takeover, folks, of TPUSA. Correct. That much is true. All right. Hey, I respect your honesty for telling me what you really feel about what could have happened to Charlie.
I wish I had more evidence. I thought it was very odd that Tucker Carlson laughed all the way through the funeral, and there were some other tells that, kind of raised a few red flags to me.
Yeah,
but,
like the pyrotechnics, maybe?
The pyrotechnics and the leather hot pants and a few other things that were just a little, out of character, didn't really go with a funeral.
Well, I got to tell you, regardless of what Charlie's role was in this thing, Erica's role in this thing is the sussiest damn thing I've ever seen. She's getting ratioed about as badly as Bongino is at this point because of the sparkly outfits and the rock star looks and the kind of the fake tears and the embrace of JD Vance, where she puts her sexy little hand on the back of his head in a very, come on, that's not an appropriate embrace in a public forum at any event, much less one where you're kind of sort of trying to mourn over your husband's death, his murder. And then we find out she's been lying about her past and she was dating professional athletes and she's, in front of the camera.
Star.
Have you seen the new clips of her in front of the camera constantly? I don't know. We won't even play it here, but I think through her mother's military contracts, Erica got all sorts of, on camera work. It's just crazy. None of her official story adds up at all. I mean, at all. She's definitely an asset in my view, Susan.
Yes, we have 2 actors, and maybe it was time to retire one of them.
Oh my God. That is such a cynical view, but I totally get where you're coming from. And believe me, people in the comments below will go, Susan's right. A lot of people agree with you, Susan. All right. I appreciate you very much. Again, shout out the website. And what book would you suggest people buy? Is it the BlackRock book?
There are a few. The other one is the Saudi swindle, which kind of provides the foundational background of the petrodollar on why they had to retire it, and it's not what you think. They actually overproduced the oil wells, in which took the petrodollar down a different angle. And also, I think one book that a lot of my readers have enjoyed is Royal Blood Lies, and that reveals how Jesus had established the divine right to rule and God's kingdom on earth. And I think that's an interesting book as well.
Good Lord. I didn't realize you were so prodigious. Look at all of this work. Royal Blood Lies. There it is. All right. Well, we're going to have to get you back on again. We're just scratching the surface today. I appreciate you very much. Thanks for rolling with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. Investigative journalist, truth teller, author, Susan Bradford. Guys, get the books at susanbradfordbooks.com. The link is below. The looting is on, and it's far worse than I think any of us ever dreamed. Pray, prepare, and then pray again. Our guest has been Susan Bradford. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, friends, I'll remind you every single day for free. Check us out to get the real news 24/7, the antidote to corporate propaganda at sgtreport.com. It's all free. And until next time, guys, God bless you and yours. Bye-bye.
From Joe and Jane's six-pack to the Harvard Endowment Fund. Funny fact, the Harvard Endowment Fund just bought a couple $100 million of metal. But he would say the allocation of gold and silver, physical and equities amongst the entire matrix from Joe and Jane to the Harvard Endowment Fund is less than 0.5%. And forever, I would agree. The people that we've been talking to represent the pimple on the elephant's rear end. And all of a sudden, that pimple has grown into a much larger boil to the point that people are beginning to wake up, but it doesn't take much recognition to create these kinds of lines. And, the point is that people are beginning to wake up.